Hold on, you're safe now? A silent rancher rescues a hunted woman. The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, open fields of the ranch. A soft golden light spilled across the pastures, brushing the tall grass and the fences that stretched for miles. The air was cool, carrying the smell of earth, hay, and the faint scent of wildflowers. Birds sang from the trees at the edge of the property, their songs echoing in the quiet morning. This was a place where life moved slowly, where every sound and movement mattered, and where one could feel completely alone with the vast land and the animals that called it home. The rancher, a tall and sturdy man with hands hardened by years of work, was already outside. His face was lined with experience, his eyes sharp and observant. He moved with purpose, checking the fences, making sure the water troughs were full, and calling to the horses grazing in the paddock. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was calm and firm, carrying authority without harshness. People in town often said he was a quiet man, maybe even distant, but those who knew him understood that his silence was not emptiness. It was thoughtfulness, care, and patience. As he worked, he noticed something unusual. A disturbance in the grass near the far edge of the property caught his attention. The tracks were fresh, leading from the road and cutting across the field toward the shelter of the trees. They were deep, uneven, and showed signs of someone moving quickly, almost stumbling. The rancher paused, crouching to study them. Something was wrong. People rarely came out here, and the land was familiar to him in every detail. Whoever had left these tracks had done so in a hurry and with fear in their steps. A faint rustle reached his ears, barely noticeable over the soft breeze. He turned slowly, scanning the edge of the trees. At first there was nothing, just shadows and branches moving in the morning light. Then he saw her, a young woman, her clothes torn and dirty, her hair tangled, her face streaked with sweat and dust. She was limping, her steps uneven, and she looked over her shoulder constantly, as if expecting someone to be right behind her. The rancher took a careful step closer, but kept himself hidden behind a tree. He didn't want to startle her, but he needed to understand the situation. Her eyes were wide with panic, darting around as if searching for escape. Her breathing was quick, shallow, and ragged, like she had been running for a long time. The rancher felt a tight knot of concern form in his chest. Something had chased her here, something dangerous. He stayed where he was, silent and patient, watching her struggle to keep moving. Every so often she stumbled, almost falling, and the rancher could see the fear etched into every line of her face. He noticed her hands shaking, her body tense, and the way she kept glancing toward the distant road, as if hoping for help that wasn't coming. She was utterly alone, and yet she had survived this far. That told him something about her strength. Finally, she reached the fence, exhausted, and sank to her knees, breathing heavily. Her eyes caught sight of the ranch house in the distance. It was not much, just a sturdy wooden building with a porch that faced the sunrise, but to her it looked like a sanctuary, a place of safety. She didn't know if anyone lived there, but it didn't matter. She needed help, and she needed it now. The rancher stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate so as not to frighten her. His presence was commanding but not threatening. He spoke softly, his voice low and steady, almost blending with the morning wind. "Hold on, you're safe now." The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had been running from people who meant to harm her, and the sudden calm in the stranger's voice was almost shocking. For a moment, she didn't respond, unsure if this was another trick, another danger. But the kindness in his eyes, the way he moved carefully and without aggression, told her that he meant what he said. She let out a trembling breath and nodded slightly, though her body still shook with fear. The rancher extended a hand, but he didn't rush toward her. Instead, he gave her space, letting her gather herself. She hesitated, looking around as if expecting someone to appear from the trees, but there was nothing. Just him, steady and calm, and the wide-open land stretching behind her. Slowly, almost tentatively, she took his hand. His grip was firm and reassuring, not tight or controlling, just enough to guide her. He helped her to her feet, supporting her as she swayed. She leaned on him more than she realized, her legs weak from hours of running. Every step they took together brought a little more calm to her racing heart. She kept her head low, afraid to make eye contact, but she could feel his steady presence beside her, a protective barrier between her and whatever danger might be out there. As they moved toward the ranch house, the rancher's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. He noticed small signs that trouble had been near: broken branches, disturbed dirt, and the faint sound of a vehicle engine in the distance. quickly fading. He didn't speak about it, he just stayed alert, ready to act if needed. The woman, sensing his vigilance, felt a small measure of relief. She didn't have to plan her next move anymore, he was doing it for her. When they reached the porch, the rancher guided her inside. The house smelled of wood, fresh bread, and the lingering scent of animals. It was simple, clean, and well-kept, a place that radiated stability and order. He led her to a chair near the fireplace and gestured for her to sit. She sank into it gratefully, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief wash over her. He moved quietly around the room, setting down a mug of water and a small plate of food. He didn't ask questions, didn't press for details. Instead, he let her rest, understanding that the first thing she needed was safety, not interrogation. The woman's hands shook as she took the water, bringing it to her lips slowly. The simple act of drinking, of being offered care without demand, felt almost foreign to her, yet it was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. The rancher sat across from her, maintaining a calm and watchful presence. He didn't force conversation, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was protective. It allowed her to breathe, to begin to regain some sense of control over her body and mind. Occasionally, he would glance at the window or the door, checking for any signs that someone might have followed her. Every small movement was deliberate, careful, and reassuring. Hours passed, and the woman began to relax slightly. She allowed herself to lean back in the chair, closing her eyes briefly. Memories of the chase, the fear, and the constant running began to surface, but they were tempered by the steady, silent presence of the man across from her. He didn't rush her, didn't demand explanations. He simply provided safety. That was something she had almost forgotten existed in her world. By evening, the sky had turned a deep shade of orange and pink, and the first stars began to appear. The woman still felt vulnerable, but she could now imagine a path forward, one where she might survive this night, this danger. The rancher, ever watchful, made sure the doors were locked and the animals were secure. He moved with quiet confidence, showing through actions rather than words that he would protect what mattered to him, including her. As night fell completely, the woman finally allowed herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you helping me?" The rancher looked at her calmly, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fireplace. "Because you needed someone too," he said simply. His words were short, but they carried weight, reassurance, and truth. She nodded slowly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time, a feeling of safety, of hope, of trust. She didn't know what the future held. The danger that had chased her was still out there, somewhere. But for the first time in hours, maybe days, she felt like she could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. And she realized that the man who had appeared so suddenly, who had quietly guided her to safety, was more than just a stranger. He was a protector, a silent guardian in a world that had been cruel and relentless. The night deepened, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. The woman closed her eyes, leaning back, and for the first time since the chase began, she felt safe. The rancher remained by her side, a quiet presence, vigilant and strong. Outside, the stars shone above the open fields, and inside, the warmth of the house and the quiet care of the silent rancher offered a fragile but real hope. And in the stillness of that night, she whispered to herself, a small, trembling smile forming on her lips. "Hold on, I am safe now." The woman stirred in her chair by the fireplace, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the brightness. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had slept without fear pressing on her chest. The rancher was already awake, moving quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast. He didn't speak much, only the soft sounds of plates and utensils clinking, a reassuring rhythm that reminded her she was no longer alone in the world. She watched him from her chair, noticing the careful way he worked. Every motion seemed deliberate, practiced, and calm. There was strength in his silence, a sense that he understood the land, the animals, and people in a way that went beyond words. She wanted to ask him questions, to know more about who he was, but for some reason she didn't. She simply observed, feeling a quiet sense of safety that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Finally, he placed a warm plate of food in front of her, along with a cup of steaming tea. The aroma was simple, homey, comforting. She hesitated before taking a bite, her hands still trembling slightly. But hunger had grown stronger than fear, and she ate slowly, savoring each mouthful. The rancher watched her silently, giving her space, yet his eyes were always alert, scanning the windows, the door, and even the distant fields. After breakfast, he gestured toward the door, then toward the woman, and finally back at the house. She understood immediately. He wanted her to move around to regain some strength. She followed him outside, her steps unsteady, but he stayed close, ready to support her if she faltered. The open air, the soft wind across the fields, and the gentle warmth of the sun on her face made her feel lighter than she had in months. The rancher never spoke, only walked beside her, allowing her to set the pace. As the day passed, the woman began to notice the small details of the ranch. The animals were calm, their movements rhythmic and peaceful. Chickens clucked near the barn, horses grazed lazily, and the faint sound of cows moving in the distance created a gentle, steady background hum. The rancher moved among them with ease, checking on their well-being, speaking softly to the animals, and sometimes to her in the same calm tone. Each word, each gesture reminded her that she was no longer in a world of fear and danger. She began to share small bits of her story, not all at once, but little pieces that slipped out like hesitant drops of water. She told him about the people who had been after her, about the fear that had driven her to run for days, about the exhaustion that had nearly overtaken her. She didn't tell him everything. There were memories too sharp, too raw, but enough that he could understand the gravity of her situation. He listened silently, never interrupting, never judging, simply acknowledging her words with a steady presence that made her feel validated and understood. Even as she spoke, she remained aware of the danger that might still be lurking beyond the ranch's borders. Every so often, she would glance toward the trees or the road, expecting someone to appear. The rancher noticed this, and though he did not speak, he subtly guided her, showing her ways to move without drawing attention, to stay aware of her surroundings, and to find safety in the open spaces of the ranch. His instructions were unspoken, shown through action and calm movement rather than commands. By afternoon, she had begun to explore more of the property under his watchful eye. She touched the wooden fences, admired the sturdy barns, and even approached the horses, letting their gentle nuzzles remind her that life could be kind. The rancher showed her how to move quietly around the animals, how to respect their space, and how to listen to the subtle signs of their moods. Each moment was a lesson, not only about survival but also about trust, patience, and resilience. They worked together in small tasks, feeding the chickens, stacking firewood, and repairing a loose plank on the barn door. Each task gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling that she was contributing rather than being helpless. The rancher never criticized her mistakes, only demonstrated the correct way calmly, encouraging her silently. She felt a growing respect for him and a sense of gratitude that she struggled to put into words. The woman began to notice the way he watched over the ranch, his attention never wavering. He noticed small details, the way a gate might swing in the wind, the sound of an unfamiliar vehicle in the distance, the way shadows shifted in the trees. She realized that his calm presence was not passive, it was active vigilance. He was preparing for the possibility that her pursuers might come, and he was ready to face it, silently but decisively. As evening approached, the sky turning shades of orange and pink, the woman and the rancher sat outside on the porch. She watched the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a strange mixture of awe and relief. She had survived this day without fear overwhelming her, and she realized that she was beginning to trust him. She wanted to ask about his life, about why he chose to live alone on this remote ranch, but she didn't. She felt that some things didn't need words. His actions spoke louder than any explanation ever could. Suddenly, a faint sound in the distance broke the calm, the hum of a vehicle engine, too deliberate to be random. Her heart leapt, and she instinctively moved closer to the rancher. He didn't panic. Instead, he observed, calculated, and waited. His eyes narrowed slightly as the sound grew closer, then faded again, moving away. He didn't speak, but she understood. He had detected a possible threat, and he had chosen the best moment to act, which was to remain quiet and prepared rather than alarmed. The woman felt a mix of fear and reassurance. Fear because the danger was real and could return at any time. Reassurance because the man who had saved her was ready, calm, and capable. She realized that safety was not just about escaping danger. It was about having someone who could face it for you, someone who would not falter, no matter how threatening it seemed. Night came, and with it a blanket of stars that stretched across the sky. The ranch was quiet, save for the gentle movements of animals settling down for the night and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Inside, the woman sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, while the rancher moved around the house, securing doors, checking locks, and making sure everything was as it should be. His actions were methodical, precise, and calm, and they communicated a sense of protection that words could never fully convey. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for everything. I don't even know your name, but I feel safe." The rancher paused, looking at her with calm eyes. He didn't smile, not openly, but there was a warmth in his gaze that acknowledged her words. "You are safe here," he said simply. His voice was low, firm, and unwavering. That was enough for her. Words were not needed beyond that. She realized that trust was slowly returning to her, fragile as it was. For so long, she had been running, hiding, and fearing betrayal. Now she felt a glimmer of hope, the possibility that she could survive not just physically, but emotionally as well. The rancher had not only given her shelter, he had given her a space where fear could begin to fade, replaced by cautious courage. They stayed near the fire for hours, speaking very little, but sharing a quiet companionship. Each of them respected the other's space, understanding that silence could sometimes be as meaningful as words. She began to notice the small details of him, the way he moved, the way he listened, the way he anticipated problems before they occurred. There was a wisdom in him, earned through years of solitude, observation, and hard work. As she prepared to rest for the night, she felt a sense of calm that was almost foreign. The terror that had dominated her life for days was no longer pressing down on her chest. She could breathe, she could think, she could exist without constant panic. And she knew deep down that it was because of him. Because of the silent rancher who had guided her here, who had offered protection without asking for anything in return. Outside, the wind whispered softly across the open fields, and the stars shone brightly in the clear sky. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the rancher offered a fragile but real sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, the woman allowed herself to hope. She did not yet know what the future held, but she understood one truth clearly. She was no longer alone, and she was no longer entirely at the mercy of those who had hunted her. And in the quiet of the ranch, as night deepened and the world outside seemed vast and unknowable, she whispered to herself almost as a promise, "I will survive, and I am not alone." The birds began their morning songs, and the animals stirred, moving quietly through the fields. But the calm of the early morning was deceiving. The woman, now more rested and alert, still felt a knot of unease deep in her chest. She had begun to trust the rancher, but she also knew that danger had not vanished. It had only been held at bay for a little while. The rancher moved silently through the yard, checking fences, watering troughs, and the barn doors. His eyes were alert, scanning the distance beyond the property. The wind carried subtle sounds from the surrounding roads and fields, and his senses seemed to pick up every small disturbance. The snap of a twig, the faint hum of a distant engine, the whisper of movement in the trees. He didn't speak, but his actions communicated the same message as before. They must be ready for anything. The woman followed at a cautious distance, moving slowly but steadily. She had grown stronger in the last 2 days, her limbs less shaky and her breathing more even. The rancher had taught her how to move quietly, how to watch the surroundings without panicking, and how to stay alert without allowing fear to take over. She was beginning to feel a sense of control returning to her life, though it was still fragile. By mid-morning, a faint sound reached the rancher's ears, the low rumble of a vehicle engine on the distant road. His eyes narrowed, and he paused, listening carefully. He motioned subtly to the woman, guiding her behind the barn out of sight. Her heart beat faster, but she obeyed without question. She had learned that his calm judgment was always right. The sound grew louder, the engine nearing the property. The rancher could see the vehicle cresting the hill in the distance, a dusty pickup moving slowly, deliberately. He crouched behind a stack of firewood, signaling for the woman to stay close and remain silent. She pressed herself against the rough wood, her palms sweaty, and felt a mixture of fear and awe. She had never seen someone so calm in the face of danger, so ready to protect without a word. The pickup stopped at the edge of the field, and 2 men stepped out. They looked around, scanning the landscape, speaking in low voices. The woman recognized them from her past, the men who had been chasing her, the ones who had caused her so much fear. Her stomach tightened and she felt a surge of panic, but the rancher's hand on her shoulder steadied her. His grip was firm, reassuring, and she felt her breath slow slightly. He moved silently, guiding her to a small hiding place behind a haystack. From there he could observe the men without being seen. The men wandered closer, looking around, clearly searching for someone. The rancher noticed every detail, their movements, their hesitation, the way they split up to cover more ground. He did not panic. Instead, he began to think of ways to protect both of them and to prevent the men from discovering her. The woman watched him, amazed at his calm and strategic mind. He began to use the terrain to his advantage, subtly shifting objects, moving shadows, and positioning himself so that he could intercept anyone who got too close. He was preparing not just to hide her, but to protect her actively without putting unnecessary risk in front. She realized that he was thinking several steps ahead, anticipating every possible move the men could make. Hours passed as the men searched, growing frustrated with the open space and lack of immediate success. The rancher remained hidden, observing, calculating. He noticed the moment when one man started to wander closer to the barn, clearly suspicious of the area near the animals. With swift precision, the rancher created a small distraction, a bucket tipping over, making a loud metallic clang that echoed across the yard. The man jumped, startled, and glanced away, giving the rancher the perfect opportunity to guide the woman further into the safety of the barn. Inside, the woman crouched low, holding her breath as the men approached the doors. She could hear their footsteps, muffled voices, and the faint scraping of boots against the wooden floor. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt an icy fear crawling up her spine. The rancher knelt beside her, whispering softly, "Stay calm, don't move, you're safe with me." The men lingered outside, looking for signs of movement. The rancher subtly positioned himself between the woman and the door, ready to intervene if needed. He had no intention of letting them find her. Using his knowledge of the ranch, he created small obstacles and noise to mislead them, drawing them away from the barn and toward empty areas where they could search without success. The woman was both terrified and impressed. She had never imagined that someone could remain so calm and composed in the presence of such danger. His silence, once intimidating, now felt like a shield, a protective wall between her and the threat outside. She realized that survival wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about having someone who could think clearly and act decisively when fear was high. As the day wore on, the men finally began to retreat, frustrated and unsuccessful in their search. The rancher waited until they were out of sight before emerging from his hiding place, still alert and cautious. He guided the woman back outside, showing her that it was safe to move, though still keeping them close to cover and away from open areas. The woman felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had survived the day because of him, because of his calm, strategic mind and his willingness to act decisively. She began to understand the depth of his character, the way he could face danger without panic, the way he protected others without seeking recognition or reward. She felt a new sense of hope, realizing that she could rely on him, that she was not alone in facing the threats that had pursued her for so long. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the fields, the rancher led her to a safe spot near the house. He had checked the perimeter, secured the animals, and ensured that nothing unusual remained. The woman sank into a chair, exhausted from the day's tension but also feeling a sense of relief. She realized that she had begun to trust him completely, to rely on his judgment and his quiet strength. For the first time since the chase began, she allowed herself to speak freely, sharing more details about her past, the people who had hunted her, and the fear that had driven her to flee. The rancher listened silently, nodding occasionally, offering comfort through his presence rather than words. She began to feel the heavy weight of fear lifting, replaced by a cautious optimism that perhaps, finally, she could survive and rebuild her life. Night fell and the ranch became quiet once more. The woman sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, thinking about the day's events. She had witnessed the courage and intelligence of the rancher firsthand, and she knew that without him, she would not have survived. She felt a mixture of awe and deep respect for this silent man who had appeared out of nowhere and become her protector. Outside, the stars shone brightly over the open fields, the wind whispering through the trees. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the rancher provided a fragile but real sense of security. She realized that the world was still dangerous, that threats could return at any moment, but for now, she was safe. And she understood, with a sense of clarity, that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about finding someone who could stand beside you when fear threatened to overwhelm you. She looked at the rancher, noticing the way he moved around the house, checking locks, making sure the animals were safe, and quietly preparing for any eventuality. His vigilance never wavered, and she realized that this was more than protection. It was a dedication to her life, a silent promise that he would not let harm reach her as long as he could act. Her thoughts drifted to the future. She knew that she could not remain here forever, that eventually she would need to find safety beyond the ranch, legal protection, or support from authorities. But for the first time, she felt capable of taking those steps, knowing that she had someone to guide and protect her through the immediate danger. She was no longer paralyzed by fear. She was beginning to reclaim her courage. The rancher approached her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. It was a gesture of reassurance, calm and steady, and she felt the tension in her body ease slightly. He did not speak, for words were not necessary. His actions communicated the same message he had whispered when they first met. "You are safe now." That night, the woman slept with a sense of cautious peace. She dreamed not of fear and running, but of open fields, quiet animals, and the steady presence of the man who had saved her life. She realized that her journey was far from over, but she had taken the first step toward freedom, courage, and trust. And she knew that she would not have done so without him, the silent rancher who had faced danger on her behalf, who had guided her through fear with patience and skill, and who had offered her a sanctuary when she had none. In the quiet of the night, as the wind rustled through the trees and the stars twinkled overhead, she whispered to herself, a promise forming in her heart. "I will survive. I will not give up. I am not alone." For the first time since she had fled her pursuers, she felt a calm settle over her, though her mind remained alert. The night had been quiet, with no signs of danger, and she could feel that the rancher had taken every precaution to keep them safe. The rancher moved about the property with his usual quiet efficiency. He checked the fences, made sure the animals had food and water, and looked toward the roads leading into the ranch. His eyes were sharp and watchful, always scanning, always calculating. He didn't speak much, but his actions communicated a strong sense of protection and care. The woman had come to trust him deeply. She no longer flinched at his silence. Instead, she saw it as a shield, a steady presence she could rely on. She joined him in feeding the animals. The horses nickered softly as she approached, and she felt a small sense of joy in the simple connection. The rancher guided her hand as she gave hay to the horses, showing her how to move slowly and calmly so as not to startle them. They worked side by side, their movements silent but coordinated. She began to realize that safety could be found in routine, in quiet tasks, in the rhythm of life that continued even after chaos and fear. After breakfast, the rancher led her to a small area behind the barn where they could speak privately. She had questions now, questions about what to do next, about how to ensure the threat was gone for good. He listened patiently as she spoke, nodding, but he didn't rush to give answers. Instead, he encouraged her to think carefully, to plan her next steps with caution and awareness. He taught her that safety was not just about hiding. It was about preparation, strategy, and understanding one's surroundings. Over the next few days, they worked together to secure the ranch even more. The woman learned to notice small signs, footprints, broken branches, unusual sounds. The rancher taught her how to move silently, how to anticipate danger, and how to respond calmly when faced with unexpected challenges. Each lesson strengthened her confidence. She realized that she was no longer just a frightened victim. She was becoming capable, aware, and resilient. One afternoon, a vehicle appeared in the distance on the road leading to the ranch. The woman tensed, her heart racing, but the rancher didn't panic. He calmly assessed the situation, noting the direction and speed of the vehicle. It approached slowly, then stopped near the gate. Two officials stepped out, law enforcement officers who had been searching for her to offer protection. Relief washed over her, but she also felt a sense of pride. She had survived the worst of the threat, and she was ready to take the next steps toward permanent safety. The rancher guided her through the process with quiet confidence. They spoke with the officers, provided statements, and arranged for temporary legal protection to ensure that her pursuers could not approach her again. Throughout it all, he remained calm, offering reassurance with his presence rather than words. The woman felt a profound sense of gratitude. Without him, she knew she would not have survived these tense days, and she understood that his courage and wisdom had been the foundation of her safety. After the officers left, the rancher and the woman walked through the fields together. She felt lighter, freer, and more capable than she had in months. She shared her feelings with him, telling him how much his guidance had meant, how much his calm strength had inspired her. He listened silently, offering only a nod and a small smile. Words were unnecessary. The bond they had formed was evident in their shared understanding and mutual respect. Evening fell over the ranch, and the sky was painted in deep orange and purple. They sat on the porch, watching the sun disappear behind the distant hills. The woman reflected on her journey, from terror and flight to safety and hope. She realized that her survival was not just about escaping danger, but about finding someone who believed in her, who offered protection without judgment, and who allowed her to reclaim her strength. The rancher remained a silent presence beside her, watching the fields, observing the animals, and ensuring that everything was as it should be. She felt a sense of peace that had been missing from her life for years. The fear that had dominated her existence was fading, replaced by cautious optimism and a sense of empowerment. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live again. Over the next weeks, she stayed at the ranch, continuing to rebuild her strength and confidence. The rancher taught her skills that were practical and empowering: how to care for animals, how to navigate the terrain safely, how to respond calmly to unexpected challenges. Each lesson brought her closer to independence, and she began to see a future where she could move forward without constant fear. One day, she asked him about his life, about why he lived on this remote ranch, and why he had chosen to help her without hesitation. The rancher looked at her thoughtfully, then shrugged slightly. "I know what it's like to face the world alone," he said softly. "If I can make it safer for someone else, I do." His words were simple, but they carried profound meaning. She realized that his actions had always spoken louder than words, and now she understood the depth of his character. The woman also began to connect with other support systems: friends, community members, and professionals who could help her continue building a safe and independent life. She realized that while the rancher had been her immediate protector, her long-term safety would depend on broader support. He encouraged her every step of the way, never pushing, only guiding. His quiet mentorship had taught her resilience, awareness, and the importance of strategic action. As weeks passed, the threat that had haunted her faded into memory. Legal measures ensured that her pursuers could not return, and she felt a sense of closure and relief. She could finally breathe without fear, move without hesitation, and think about the future without anxiety. The rancher's presence had been a constant, stabilizing force, and she knew that she would carry the lessons he had taught her for the rest of her life. One evening, she and the rancher sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The air was warm, and the animals were settling down for the night. She turned to him and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you enough. You saved my life more than once." He looked at her calmly, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "You didn't need saving forever," he said simply. "You just needed someone to hold the line until you could stand on your own, and you did." Tears welled in her eyes, not just from relief but from the profound gratitude she felt. She had been hunted, terrified, and alone, and now she had survived, healed, and regained hope. The rancher had given her more than protection. He had given her a chance to believe in herself again. The night deepened, and the stars shone brightly over the ranch. The woman reflected on her journey: the terror of being hunted, the exhaustion of fleeing, the tension of hiding, and the relief of finally finding safety. But most importantly, she thought about the quiet strength of the man who had guided her, protected her, and allowed her to reclaim her life. She realized that heroism did not always shout. It sometimes arrived quietly, steadfastly, and without recognition. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became not just a place of safety, but a sanctuary. The woman regained her independence, practiced her skills, and connected with others who could support her. She felt empowered, capable, and ready to face the world without fear. Yet she also carried with her the memory of the silent rancher, the man who had given her the first real sense of safety in months, and who had shown her that courage and protection could exist without words. The final evening of her stay at the ranch arrived. The sun set in fiery shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the fields. She and the rancher stood together, looking out at the land that had become her refuge. She felt a mixture of gratitude, relief, and admiration. She turned to him one last time and said, "I will never forget what you did for me. You saved more than my life, you saved my hope." He nodded quietly, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing his face. "And you'll carry it forward," he said simply. "That's the most important part." As she prepared to leave the ranch, she realized that her journey was not ending, it was beginning. She had survived terror, found safety, learned resilience, and regained hope. The rancher had been the first step, the quiet anchor in a storm of fear. Now she was ready to face the world, carrying with her the lessons of courage, vigilance, and quiet strength. She walked down the path toward the road, looking back one last time at the ranch, at the man who had become her protector and mentor, and whispered softly to herself, "Hold on, I am safe now, and I will be strong." The rancher watched her go, standing silently on the porch. The sun dipped below the horizon, the fields darkened, and the wind whispered through the trees. He had not sought recognition, reward, or thanks. He had simply done what needed to be done. And in the quiet of the ranch, he knew that she would carry forward the gift of safety, hope, and courage that he had given her. In the end, the ranch was more than land and animals. It was a place where fear could be replaced with strength, where courage could be nurtured, and where even the most hunted and desperate could find a chance to survive, heal, and begin anew. The woman's journey had begun in terror and ended in hope, and it had all started with the quiet, steadfast presence of a man who had said, "Hold on, you're safe now."